The wallet didn't belong in her section. Noelle knew every corner of Diner 40 for the way she knew the calluses on her own feet, intimately, painfully, without romance. She knew which booth wobbled when the wind came through the cracked east window. She knew the coffee machine would stutter twice before the third cup poured clean. She knew that table 7 always left exactly $4, no matter what they ordered, no matter how long she smiled. She knew this place the way you know something that was never meant to be yours forever, but became yours anyway because life had other plans. So when she spotted the wallet wedged between the vinyl cushion and the wall of booth 12, she noticed immediately. Not because it was there. Things got left behind all the time. Sunglasses, scarves, once a baby shoe, just one, which had disturbed her for a week. She noticed because of what it looked like. Black leather, so fine, it almost had a sheen in the fluorescent light. Not the kind of wallet that ended up in a diner on the corner of Westfall and Ninth. Not in this neighborhood. Not at this hour, with rain pressing flat against the windows and the last customer having left 20 minutes ago. Noelle set down her cleaning cloth and picked it up. The weight alone told a story. Thick, solid. She held it the way you hold something you already know you shouldn't have touched, but the damage was done. She opened it. Cash. Real cash, not folded, stacked, organized, as though money itself behaved differently for whoever owned this. There were bills she had to count twice because her brain refused to accept the number the first time. And beneath them, a single card. No bank logo. No name. Just a private number etched in silver against matte black. No ID. No photo. Nothing that said who this man was. Just the number. And all that money. Noelle stood in the middle of her empty diner at 11:43 on a Thursday night, with rent overdue by 9 days, a water heater that had been lying to her for 3 weeks, and enough cash in her hand to fix every problem she currently had and 3 she hadn't invented yet. She stood there for a very long time. Then she closed the wallet, set it on the counter, and went back to wiping down tables. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have seen through the Rain Street glass and the amber haze of the street lamp outside, was the figure standing on the opposite sidewalk. Still, watching, his hands in the pockets of a coat that cost more than her car, his eyes fixed on the window of Diner 44 with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world. He watched her find the wallet. He watched her open it. He watched her put it back. And when she did, something shifted in his expression. Something that wasn't quite a smile. Something older and more dangerous than satisfaction. Beside him, a shorter man exhaled slowly. She didn't take it. No, the figure said. She didn't. A pause stretched between them, filled with rain and the distant hum of the city. Do you want us to retrieve it? The shorter man asked. The figure said nothing for a moment. He was still watching the window. Watching the woman inside move through her empty diner with the quiet efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped expecting the night to offer her anything good. Leave it, he said finally. His voice was low, certain, the kind of certainty that didn't ask for agreement. She'll call. Chapter 1. Noelle Varia had been raised by a woman who believed that character was what you did when no one was looking. Her mother had said over 100 variations of the same dinner table. Rice, sometimes with beans, sometimes without, always with the same ceramic plates that had survived 3 moves and 1 kitchen fire. She had said it the way people say things they need to be true, because the world kept proving otherwise. Noelle had believed her anyway. She still believed her. Even now, at 26, with flour on her apron, and a right knee that ached when it rained, and a bank account that had started sending her gentle, concerned notifications. She believed it in the practiced, stubborn way of someone who has made a decision about who they are and intends to keep it regardless of the cost. Which was why the wallet was still on the counter when Sable arrived at 6 the next morning. Sable, her co-worker, her closest friend, the only person who understood the particular exhaustion of their particular kind of life, stopped just inside the door and stared at it. Please tell me that's not real. It's real, Noelle said. She was already in her apron, coffee in hand, the morning prep half done. Sable crossed the distance in 3 steps and opened the wallet with a speed that suggested she had fewer philosophical reservations about the situation. Her eyes went wide, then wider. Then she looked at Noelle with an expression that was equal parts awe and exasperation. Noelle, I know. This is. I know, Sable. This is more money than we make in. I know. Sable closed the wallet slowly. She set it down. She looked at Noelle carefully, considering the expression of someone choosing their next words very precisely. You're going to call the number, aren't you? It wasn't really a question. It's the right thing to do, Noelle said, and she heard how it sounded thin and insufficient against the weight of 9 days overdue rent. She heard it, and she said it anyway. Sable looked at her for a long moment. Then she poured herself a coffee, sat on the counter, a thing their manager had forbidden 17 times, and said, Okay, but I'm staying. Noelle called the number at 7:03. When the diner opened and the first regulars began filtering in, and she could excuse the tremor in her hands as the morning cold. It rang twice. You found it. The voice on the other end was not what she expected. She had constructed some version of the wallet's owner in her mind overnight. A careless man, probably older, probably the kind of rich that comes from inheritance rather than effort, the kind that leaves wallets behind because wallets are replaceable. The voice that answered was none of those things. It was low and even and unhurried, with a quality she couldn't immediately name, the quality of a man who was never rushed, because nothing in his world moved faster than he allowed. Yes, she said. I found your wallet. Are you the owner? I am. You should be more careful, she said, before she could stop herself. A pause. Then, again, that thing that wasn't quite a smile but lived in the neighborhood of one. You're right. I should. Another pause. Can I come get it? We open until 10. Come before then. She almost hung up. Then, or send someone. Whoever's convenient. She hung up before he could respond. Sable was staring at her from across the counter. You told the man who owns that wallet to send someone convenient. His inconvenience isn't my problem. Sable considered this. You know what, Fair? The morning rush absorbed her after that. Orders and refills and the particular ballet of a small diner at capacity, where the difference between smooth and chaotic was exactly 2 steps and 1 wrong turn. Noelle fell into the rhythm of it the way she always did, grateful for the way physical work silenced the louder parts of her mind. She had almost stopped thinking about the wallet entirely when the door opened at 8:47, and the diner went quiet. Not because anyone announced anything. Not because a single person said a word. It was the specific, involuntary quiet that happens when a room of ordinary people suddenly registers something extraordinary has entered it. Conversations didn't stop. They just faltered, became uncertain of themselves. Noelle had her back to the door. She was refilling the coffee at table 3. She felt the change in the room before she turned, felt it the way you feel a drop in barometric pressure, a shift in the weight of the air itself. She turned. He was standing just inside the entrance, tall in the way that doesn't announce itself immediately. Not a performance of height, but a fact of it integrated into the way he stood, the way the space around him seemed to quietly reorganize. Dark coat, no tie, the kind of effortless composure that isn't practiced because it doesn't need to be. His skin was deep brown, his jaw was sharp, and his eyes were the problem. Dark, steady, already on her, which was impossible because he had just walked in. He couldn't have known which of the staff was which. And yet there was no uncertainty in his gaze. No searching. He looked across the diner and found her immediately. The way you find something you already knew the location of. Noelle finished pouring the coffee, set the pot down with a careful, deliberate steadiness, and walked to the counter. You didn't send someone, she said. No, he said. I didn't. She pulled the wallet from beneath the counter where she'd kept it and placed it between them. He looked at it, then at her. He didn't reach for it immediately, which was strange. It was his. She'd returned it. The transaction was complete. But he seemed in no hurry to end whatever was currently happening. Thank you, he said. And he said it the way people say things they actually mean, without the social gloss, without the performance. Just the words, direct and quiet. It's the right thing to do, she said, which was what she told Sable, and it was still true, and it still sounded thin. He studied her for a moment. The kind of study that wasn't rude, Exactly, but was more thorough than comfortable, as though he was reading something in her face that she hadn't written there intentionally. Let me leave you something, he said. For the trouble. There was no trouble. To be honest, then, that's not something you pay for. She said it quickly, cleanly, with the practiced authority of a woman who has had to assert small dignities in large rooms her whole life. Something in his expression shifted, not wounded. This was not a man who was wounded easily, but changed, recalibrated. He looked at her with a new quality of attention that she couldn't categorize and didn't particularly want to examine. What's your name? He asked. She should not have answered. She knew she shouldn't, even in the moment of answering. The same way you know a thing is inevitable just before it happens. Noel, she said. He held her gaze for one beat too long. Selim, he said, as though it were an exchange, as though they were now even. Then he took the wallet, turned, and walked out of the diner. The room let out a collective, unconscious breath. Sable materialized at Noel's elbow with the speed of someone who had been vibrating in place for several minutes. Noel, don't. That man, don't, Sable, looked at you like you were the only person in the room. Noel picked up the coffee pot. There were 3 tables that needed refills, and the morning had 4 more hours left in it, and she had absolutely no intention of spending any of them thinking about a man named Selim, and the way his eyes had found her before he could possibly have known where she was. She went back to work. She told herself she felt nothing. She was almost convincing. Almost, because there was something small and strange sitting at the base of her sternum now. Not a feeling she had a name for. Not warmth, exactly. Not recognition. Something older than both. Something that had no right to be there. And absolutely refused to leave. Chapter 2. He came back the next day. No wallet this time. No excuse. No pretense of one. Noel saw him before the bell above the door finished ringing, and she felt that thing again. That small, nameless pressure beneath her sternum, like a fist closing around something she hadn't known was there. She felt it, recognized it from the day before, and immediately decided to be annoyed by it instead. Annoyance was manageable. Annoyance had a shape she could work with. He took the same booth. 12. The one where the wallet had been. He sat with the same unhurried stillness, shrugging off that dark coat, settling into the cracked vinyl with the quiet ease of a man who made every surface feel deliberately chosen. He picked up the laminated menu and looked at it the way people look at things they are not actually reading. Noelle finished her current table. She took her time. She refilled 2 coffees. She could have left for another 5 minutes. She checked on an order that was already fine. Then she walked over, order pad in hand, and looked at him with the professional blankness she had spent years perfecting. Coffee, she said. Please. He set the menu down. He was looking at her again with that quality of attention that made her feel simultaneously seen and unsettled, as though he were listening to something underneath her words that she hadn't meant to broadcast. She poured. She did not ask if he needed a moment because she intended to leave before he could request one. What's good here? He asked. Everything on the left side of the menu. The right side is ambitious. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Ambitious how? The chef has opinions about eggs that the eggs don't always share. He laughed at that. A low, brief sound, genuine in the way that surprised laughter always is unprepared, unguarded. It changed his face in a way she noticed despite herself. The composed, still quality cracked open for just a moment, and underneath it was something younger. Something almost warm. She looked down at her order pad. I'll have the French toast, he said. Left side, I'm assuming. Safe choice. She took the pad and left before the conversation could become anything more than an order. Sable found her at the coffee station 3 minutes later with the look of a woman in possession of information she was physically struggling to contain. He came back. I see that. He's in your section. Yes. He specifically requested your section, Noelle. I heard him tell Marcus when he walked in. Noelle set the coffee pot down with slightly more force than necessary. She kept her voice even. He's a customer. He's a customer who had his pick of every section in this diner on a Thursday morning when half the city is still asleep, and he asked specifically to sit in yours. Sable tilted her head. Men who look like that don't do things by accident. Men who look like what? Sable stared at her. I'm serious. I don't know what you mean. No El Varia, Sable said, with the measured gravity of someone reading a verdict. You have been working doubles for 11 days, and I think the exhaustion has made you unwell. That man is extraordinary looking. The kind of extraordinary that makes the air feel thinner. You know this. I know you know this. I saw your face yesterday. My face was doing nothing yesterday. Your face was doing everything yesterday. Noelle picked up the coffee pot and walked away from the conversation with as much dignity as the situation allowed. She delivered his French toast at 8:52. He thanked her without looking at the plate. He was looking at her with that same steady attention, and she had the unsettling sense that if she asked him to describe the diner right now, he wouldn't be able to. That he had not registered a single detail of this room beyond her. You didn't leave a number, he said. She blinked. I'm sorry. Yesterday, when you called, your number wasn't in my phone after. You hung up before I could ask. A pause. I'd like to be able to reach you. She looked at him for a moment. There was nothing predatory in the request. Nothing that felt like the particular performance of interest she had learned to recognize and sidestep over years of restaurant work. He asked it the way he said thank you yesterday. Simply, directly, as though it were a reasonable thing said between two people, and the formality of their current positions in this room was something they could both see and temporarily set aside. That made it more dangerous, not less. I'm a waitress, she said. Not a contact. I know what you are, he said. And he said it in a way that landed differently than it should have, not dismissive, not reductive. The opposite. Said with a certainty that implied he meant it more thoroughly than the words suggested. She held his gaze for exactly as long as it took to confirm that she was not flustered. Then she set his check on the table, he hadn't asked for it, and walked away. He left 20 minutes later. He left a tip that made Marcus, the morning manager, stop and stare at the table for a full 4 seconds before looking up at Noelle with an expression she couldn't interpret. You know him? Marcus asked. No, she said. Marcus looked back at the table. Huh, he said, in the tone of a man processing a revision. Noelle tucked the tip into her apron pocket without looking at it. She went to clear the booth. She took his coffee cup, his plate, the folded napkin, and found, beneath the napkin, a plain white card. No name, no number, just 2 lines, handwritten in careful, dark ink. A man who returns is trying to tell you something. So is a woman who lets him sit. She stood in the middle of booth 12 for a long moment, card in hand, with the morning noise of the diner continuing around her as though the world were completely indifferent to the fact that something had just happened, even if she couldn't say what. She put the card in her apron pocket. She told herself it meant nothing. She did not throw it away. 3 days passed. He didn't come back, which was fine, which was exactly what she had expected and wanted and chosen by not giving him her number. She had drawn a line with the clean, practiced efficiency of a woman who had learned that lines were the only architecture she could control, and she was satisfied with the decision. She was completely satisfied. She thought about the card approximately 7 times a day. On the 4th day, she found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning, looking at her own face with a quiet, reluctant honesty, and asking herself a question she didn't entirely want to answer. What was it exactly that she had felt when he walked into the diner? She pressed her fingers to her sternum, just beneath the collarbone, where that sensation had lived since the first moment she turned and found his eyes already on her. It was still there, faint now, duller, but present in the way a bruise is present even after the tenderness eases. A constant low awareness. She was not a fanciful woman. She did not believe in fate or signs, or the universe arranging things with narrative intention. She believed in work, in honesty, in the slow accumulation of small dignities. She believed in her mother's voice over the kitchen table and the discipline it had built in her over a lifetime. She did not believe in the feeling currently residing beneath her sternum. And yet it was there, patient and irrational, like a pilot light that no practical decision could quite reach. She turned away from the mirror, got dressed, and went to work. The diner was halfway through the morning rush when she felt it, not heard, not saw, felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. That same barely perceptible recalibration, as though the air had rearranged itself to accommodate something. She was at the counter. She did not turn around. She heard the bell above the door. She heard Marcus say something brief and deferential. She heard the booth behind her settle under a specific weight. She finished writing her current order. She let 60 full seconds pass. Then she turned. He was looking at her, as though he had been looking at her since before he walked through the door. As though the looking was continuous and the rest of the world was simply the scenery it occurred in. She walked over. "You were gone in a few days," she said. She had not intended to say that. She heard it leave her mouth and noted, with cold clarity, that she needed to have a serious conversation with herself later. "I was," he said. He didn't apologize for it or explain it or use it to imply anything. He simply confirmed it, the way he confirmed most things, as though facts were sufficient and required no decoration. "Coffee," she said. "Yes." And then, before she could retreat into the transaction, "Did you read it?" She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. "Yes." And it was presumptuous. "Honest," he offered. "Those can be the same thing," she said. He considered that. The corner of his mouth moved in that almost way she was beginning to catalog despite herself. "You're right," he said. "They can." She poured his coffee. She stood there a moment longer than was professionally necessary. She was trying to locate the exact source of the pull she felt toward this man. Not attraction, or not only that, but something more structural, more insistent. Something that seemed to operate below the level of her preferences, beneath her choices, in a register she didn't have language for yet. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked. She kept her voice level, clinical almost. He looked at her steadily. "Because something in me recognized something in you. The first time I walked in." A pause. "And I've spent my whole life paying attention to that particular instinct." Noelle absorbed that. She thought about her mother's voice. Character is what you do when no one is looking. She thought about the wallet and the money she hadn't taken, and this man standing on a sidewalk in the rain watching to see what she would do. The thought arrived quietly, without drama, but with the cold precision of a key turning in a lock. He was watching her that night. He was there. He saw her not take it. The wallet wasn't lost. It was placed. She looked at him, really looked, in the way she had been carefully avoiding, and she saw nothing that denied the thought. She saw steadiness. She saw patience. She saw the expression of a man who has been waiting for a specific conversation and is neither afraid of it nor in a hurry to force it. She set the coffee pot down on his table. She leaned forward, slightly, just enough that the words would be between them and nowhere else. "That wallet wasn't an accident," she said. "Was it?" Not a question. Not anymore. He held her gaze. The diner continued around them. Orders were called. The coffee machine stuttered twice before the third cup. The loose booth by the east window shifted in the morning draft. And Selim did not look away. "No," he said at last. Quietly, without apology. "It wasn't." The word landed in her chest like a stone into still water, and the ripples moved outward through every assumption she had made about the last week, rewriting the geography of it, changing the shape of everything she thought she understood. She straightened. She picked up the coffee pot. And for the first time in 4 days, the thing beneath her sternum didn't feel like a bruise. It felt like a warning. One she was terrifyingly unsure she was going to heed. Chapter 3. She didn't speak to him for the rest of that shift. Not because she had nothing to say. She had too much a dense, tangled architecture of questions she hadn't yet sorted into the right order, and she had learned long ago that speaking before you were ready was how you handed someone a map to your weaknesses. So she refilled his coffee once without a word, delivered his order with the professional courtesy she gave every table, and when he left, she did not watch him go. She felt him go. That was the part that frightened her. She felt the moment he stood, felt the shift in the room's pressure as he moved toward the door, felt the particular quality of the air change the way a room changes when the warmest light in it goes out. She was standing at the counter with her back to him, and she felt all of it, without turning, without looking, without a single piece of visible evidence to justify the sensation. When the bell above the door rang for the last time that morning, she exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. Sable appeared beside her with 2 cups of the staff coffee. The dark, over-extracted kind that Marcus brewed for himself and that neither of them particularly liked, but drank anyway during long shifts because it was better than nothing. She handed one to Noelle. She said nothing for a full minute. Then he told you, didn't he? Noelle wrapped both hands around the cup. That the wallet was placed. Yes. He told me. Another silence. Sable was not a dramatic woman at her core. Beneath the commentary and the wide eyes and the quick laughter was someone steady and serious who chose her moments carefully. When she was quiet like this, genuinely quiet, it meant something. How do you feel? Sable asked. Noelle considered the question honestly. Like the floor shifted by 3 inches, and I'm supposed to walk normally. Sable nodded slowly. And the part that bothers you isn't that he did it. No. She stared at her coffee. The part that bothers me is that I understand why. She could not explain that understanding fully, even to herself. There was no clean, rational pathway from a man placing a wallet in your section 2, and some part of you recognized the logic of that. No pathway she could walk in daylight without feeling that she'd taken leave of something important. But it was there. The understanding. Quiet and rootless and utterly inconvenient. She went home that afternoon and sat at her kitchen table with her mother's photograph in front of her. Her mother young, 20-something, the year before everything changed, and she asked in silence a question she had no right to ask. What is happening to me? The silence, as usual, offered nothing useful. He came back the following morning, and the morning after that. By the end of the second week, he had a pattern. 8:45, booth 12. French toast on Tuesdays and Thursdays, black coffee every day, and the contained, deliberate patience of a man conducting a very long and careful conversation across the structure of a routine. He never pushed. That was the thing she kept returning to, held up against her expectation of men with his particular brand of certainty. She had anticipated pressure, the slow, sophisticated kind that wears the costume of interest while functioning as possession. She had her language ready for it. Her distance was calibrated, but he didn't push. He talked to her instead. Not about himself, not at first. He asked her things, small things, initially what she was reading, whether she'd grown up in the city, which season she preferred. She answered briefly and without offering more. He accepted whatever she gave without angling for the rest, which disarmed her more than any persistence would have. She was slowly realizing, genuinely interested in her. Not in the performance of interest that men offered when they wanted something. Interested in the way a person is interested in something they find rare. Carefully, with the patience of someone who understands that the wrong movement ruins everything. By the third week, she was talking back. Not much. A sentence here, an observation there. But she noticed the shift in herself the way you notice a change in the weather, not a single dramatic moment, but a gradual alteration of the light. The professional blankness she wore at his table began to thin at the edges. Once she laughed at something he said, a quick, unguarded sound that surprised her as it left her throat, and he looked at her with an expression she felt in her sternum for the rest of the afternoon. Sable watched all of it with the focused attention of a woman compiling evidence. You like him, she said one afternoon, when the lunch rush had thinned and they were restocking the condiment trays. I don't dislike him, Noelle said carefully. That's a full 180 from where you started. It's a nuanced position. You laughed at his joke this morning. He was funny. You never laugh at customers. I laugh at customers. Name one. One customer whose joke made you laugh in the last 4 years. Noelle opened her mouth. I closed it. Right, Sable said pleasantly, and went back to the condiments. Noelle stood there for a moment with the particular discomfort of a woman who had just lost an argument she was fairly sure she'd been winning. Then she picked up the ketchup bottles and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. He arrived on a Thursday morning, 3.5 weeks after the wallet, and something was different. She noticed it before she reached the booth. Not in him. Exactly. He was the same, composed and steady in the same dark coat. But around him, the energy around him had a different quality. Tighter, more contained, like a current running at higher voltage through the same wires. She poured his coffee. She looked at him. Something's wrong, she said. Not a question. He looked up at her. Something moved through his expression, surprise, perhaps at being read that cleanly, and then he settled into honesty the way he settled into everything, without resistance. A complication, he said. Nothing that affects you. You look like a man carrying something that's getting heavier. He was quiet for a moment. There are people, he said slowly, who don't want certain things to happen, certain connections to form. He held his coffee cup with both hands and looked at it. They're becoming more vocal about it. What kind of connections? He looked up at her then. The kind I've been having French toast across from for 3 weeks. The sentence landed simply, without drama, which was somehow what made it so heavy. She stood there with the coffee pot in her hand and the morning noise of the diner around her. And she looked at this man who had placed a wallet in her section and returned every morning since and talked to her like she was someone worth the careful attention of a slow conversation. And she felt afraid. Not of him. She was honest enough to know that. Afraid of what was building in the space between them, quiet and structural and inevitable, like a wall going up brick by brick before she decided whether she wanted to be on the inside or the outside of it. Selim, she said. Noel. What are you? She asked. The question was larger than it sounded, and they both understood that. What are you actually? He looked at her for a long moment. The morning light through the diner windows caught the angle of his jaw, the stillness in his eyes, the patience that had become the most consistent thing about him. Right now, he said. A man having coffee, waiting to see if you'll let me be more. She should have walked away. She had every sensible, self-preserving reason to walk away, and she knew each one of them by name. She pulled the order pad from her apron instead. Do you want anything else? She said. Professional again. The blankness back in place, but thinner now, with something alive showing through the gaps, something she could no longer fully conceal. Yes, he said, but I'll wait. She went back to the counter. She stood there for a moment with her hand flat on the cool surface, pressing her palm against it, grounding herself in the physical specificity of the diner, the smell of coffee, the warmth of the kitchen, the familiar wobble of booth 6 in the draft. She pressed her hand to the counter and breathed, and failed, completely and without dignity, to stop the small, persistent warmth that had taken up residence beneath her sternum from spreading slowly, stubbornly, dangerously, upward, toward her heart. She was locking up that night, the late shift, just her and Marcus and the particular exhausted quiet of a closed diner, when she heard footsteps behind her on the sidewalk. She turned. It wasn't Selim. The man standing 10 feet away was someone she had not seen in 4 years, and the sight of him reached into the center of her chest and squeezed with a cold, practiced efficiency that told her the body forgets nothing, no matter how completely the mind decides to move on. Darian. He looked the same. Broader, maybe. Something harder in his face than she remembered. He was watching her with the relaxed certainty of a man who expected his own arrival to mean something, and he wasn't wrong. Her heartbeat had changed the moment she saw him, though not in the way he probably assumed. It has changed the way it changes when something dangerous becomes suddenly, unmistakably present. Noel, he said. Her name in his mouth was familiar enough to hurt and wrong enough to make her skin tighten. Darian. She kept her voice flat. Steady. What are you doing here? He smiled. The particular smile she remembered, the one that had once looked like warmth and later revealed itself to be something far more calculating underneath. Heard you were still in the city, he said. Thought I'd come by. He paused. His eyes moved over her in a way that felt like assessment rather than affection. We should catch up. We shouldn't, she said. He took a step forward, and then something happened that she could not immediately explain. That thing in her sternum, Selim's thing, the thing she had no name for, did something she had not felt it do before. It wasn't warm. It didn't pull. It rose, sharp and sudden, like an alarm tripping in a part of her she didn't know how to censor. Her breath changed. Her vision sharpened at the edges. Every hair on her arms lifted beneath her sleeves. And Darian stopped walking. He stopped and he looked at her, and something in his expression changed. A shadow of something she might have called unease, if unease seemed possible in a man who carried himself with that much surface confidence. You're different, he said slowly. His voice was low now. Careful. Something's different about you. Go home, Darian, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the diner behind her, as though reading something in its windows, as though calculating. Someone's been near you, he said, half to himself. His jaw tightened. Someone with real weight. His eyes came back to hers, and the surface ease had dropped away entirely now, replaced by something cold and direct. You need to be careful, Noelle. Not everyone who shows interest has your well-being in mind. Goodbye, she said. He held her gaze for one moment longer. Then he turned and walked away down the dark street. Unhurried, the way people walk when they want you to know they're choosing to leave, and plan to choose when to come back. Noelle stood on the sidewalk for a full 30 seconds after he disappeared. Her hands were completely steady. Her breathing was controlled. She was fine. She was fine. She pressed her fingers to her sternum, feeling that sharp new quality still resonating there. Different from the warmth, different from the pull. This was protective and fierce and ancient, like something that had been asleep in her for a very long time, and had just, without her permission, without her understanding, without any frame of reference she currently possessed. I opened one eye. Chapter 4. She didn't sleep that night, not for lack of trying. She lay in the dark with her ceiling above her and her mind refusing every invitation toward rest, running the same sequence on a loop. Darian's face, the way he'd stopped walking, the words he'd said with that careful, lowered voice. Someone's been near you. Someone with real weight. She turned onto her side. You need to be careful. She turned back. The thing in her sternum had quieted by the time she got home, settling back into that low, resident warmth she had stopped pretending was nothing. But its sharpness during those seconds on the sidewalk, that sudden, upward surge, like something ancient waking behind her ribs, that stayed with her in a way she couldn't set aside. She was not a woman given to magical thinking. She had built her life on the opposite of it, on the concrete and the measurable, on rent-due dates and honest hours and the precise, documented evidence of effort. She did not have experiences she couldn't explain and simply accepted them as furniture. So she lay in the dark and she did what she always did when something refused to resolve itself through practicality. She thought about her mother. Her mother, Varia, had been a quiet woman in the way that deep water is quiet, still at the surface, but with tremendous pressure moving beneath. She had loved Noelle with a ferocity that had occasionally felt like fear, a love that gripped too hard around certain topics, that changed the air whenever certain things were asked. Questions about their family, questions about why they moved so often, questions about her father, who existed in exactly 2 photographs and no stories. Her mother had deflected all of it with the gentleness of someone who has practiced deflection until it looks serene. She had died 4 years ago, quietly in the early morning, in the hospital bed that Noelle had sat beside for 11 days. She had said 2 things in those last hours, her voice barely enough to carry. The first was, "You are more than you know, my love." The second was something Noelle had assumed was the morphine, a small, breathless sentence that had dissolved into the room's silence so quickly that Noelle had almost convinced herself she'd misheard it. Don't let them suppress it forever. She had tucked both sentences into the back of her mind, behind the grief, behind the practical catastrophe of the following months. She had taken them out occasionally, turned them over, found nothing useful in them, and put them back. She took them out now, in the dark of her apartment at 2 in the morning, and turned them over again. You are more than you know. Don't let them suppress it forever. She pressed her fingers to her sternum, and for the first time, those sentences didn't feel like the soft, morphine-edged comfort of a dying woman reaching for poetry. They felt like a warning that had simply been waiting for the right moment to become legible. She called Sable at 7. Something happened last night, she said, without preamble. After close, I need to tell you. Sable, to her credit, asked no questions and arrived at Noelle's apartment in 22 minutes with 2 cups of proper coffee from the place on Ardmore. The one they saved for serious conversations, and the focused, unperformed attention of someone who understood the difference between listening and waiting to respond. Noelle told her everything. Darian on the sidewalk, the words, the way he'd stopped. the feeling that had risen in her chest like something triggered, the sensation that had been building for weeks now, linked in some way she couldn't articulate to Selim's presence and apparently now operating independently. She told her about her mother's last words. She said it all plainly without drama, and then she sat back and drank her coffee and waited. Sable was quiet for a long moment. She held her cup with both hands and looked at the kitchen table. And her expression was the one she wore when she was not constructing a response, but actually thinking. "Noelle," she said finally. "Yes, I need to tell you something. And I need you to hear it without deciding in the first 3 seconds that it's impossible." She paused. "Can you do that? I'm genuinely uncertain." "Try anyway." Another pause. Sable set her coffee down. "My grandmother," she began, "was not from around here. Not from this city, not from this part of the country. She was from a community, farther north, that kept to itself. She raised me on stories that I spent most of my adult life categorizing as folklore." Her eyes came up to Noelle's. Stories about bloodlines that carry something extra. About women who can feel the approach of a storm before it forms. About people whose grief and love and anger operates at a frequency that the rest of the world can't hear, but can absolutely feel. Noelle said nothing. "She called them the old blood," Sable continued. "People who carried inherited gifts that got quieter over generations, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not. She said the suppression could happen through ritual, or through grief, or through a mother who was afraid of what her child might become in a world that wasn't ready for it." The kitchen was very quiet. "Sable," Noelle said, "I know. Are you telling me?" "I'm telling you what you described, the sensation in your chest, the way it reacted to that man on the sidewalk, your mother's words. I've heard versions of this before." She held Noelle's gaze steadily. "I'm not telling you what it means. I'm telling you that it might mean something, and that you deserve to find out which." Noelle put her coffee down. She looked at the table. She looked at the grain of the wood, the ring from this morning's mug, the specific and unremarkable reality of her own kitchen. She needed its concreteness right now. She needed the ordinary. "Who is Selim?" she asked quietly. "Actually, I don't know," Sable said. "But I think you need to ask him." She waited until Friday. Not because she needed more time to decide. The decision had made itself somewhere between 2 in the morning and dawn, without consulting her preferences. She waited because she needed to feel, for 4 more days, that she was approaching it deliberately, that she was choosing it, that the ground was moving because she was walking forward, not because something beneath her was shifting on its own. He arrived at 8:45. He looked at her as she crossed the diner toward him, and she watched his face, carefully, without pretense, and she saw the moment he registered that something was different. A slight adjustment in his stillness, a quality of heightened attention, like a frequency being raised. She poured his coffee. She did not perform the transaction. "I need to talk to you," she said. "Not here. Not like this." She gestured minimally at the diner around them. The tables, the other customers, the professional distance built into the architecture of the space. "Somewhere that's not this." He looked at her steadily. "When?" "After my shift. 2:00. "Tell me where." She told him about the park on Callaway. The bench by the east gate, away from the path, where the old oak made enough shade to feel separate from the rest of the afternoon. She had sat there with her grief after her mother died, and with her thinking on the days when the apartment felt too small for the size of what she was carrying. It was hers in the way that quiet, forgotten places can belong to a person without paperwork. She told him, and then she went back to work, and she spent the next 6 hours in the clean, absorbing discipline of the morning rush, orders and refills, and the ballet she knew by heart, and she was grateful for it. Grateful for the way it kept her body occupied while her mind did whatever it needed to do in the quieter rooms behind her eyes. He was there before her. Of course he was. She spotted him from the gate, already at the bench, already still, the way he was always still, as though motion were something he chose rather than something that simply happened. He had traded the dark coat for something simpler today, and without its authority he looked different. Not smaller, that wasn't possible, but more present, more human. Somehow, in a way that made her breath adjust before she was close enough to speak. She sat beside him, not too close, enough space between them for the conversation to breathe. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The park moved around them, a child somewhere, pigeons, the distant percussion of the city, and the silence between them was the particular kind that happens when two people are both waiting for the same thing and both aware that the one who speaks first carries that weight. She spoke first. My mother said something before she died, she began, that I was more than I knew, that I shouldn't let them suppress it forever. She paused. She kept her voice level. For 4 years, I thought it was grief talking. The morphine, a mother reaching for comfort in the only language she had left. Another pause. I don't think that anymore. Selim was very still. The feeling I get, she continued, around you, in my chest. I've had it since the first morning you walked in, and it's been getting stronger for weeks, and 2 nights ago it reacted to someone from my past in a way that had nothing to do with emotion. She turned and looked at him directly. What is it? What is that? He held her gaze. There was no surprise in him. She had expected none. There was only that quiet, heavy attention and something underneath it that looked, for the first time, like something it cost him to hold. It's a bond, he said. A mate bond. The beginning of one. She let the words sit. I know how that sounds, he said. Tell me anyway. All of it. He told her. Not everything at once. He was too careful for that, too attuned to what she could absorb without the ground disappearing entirely beneath her. But enough. He told her what he was, what his people were. Old blood, old lineage, a world that ran parallel to the one she had always known, operating in the spaces between ordinary things. He told her about mate bonds, not the mythology of them, not romance, but the mechanics, the recognition, the way the bond formed between specific people, across bloodlines, and could not be manufactured or redirected or chosen away. He told her about the wallet. He said it plainly because she deserved plainness. It was an old tradition among his kind, the reveal test, passed down through generations of alphas. Not a manipulation, he said carefully, though he understood why it looked like one. A method of witnessing character in its unobserved form. The wallet was placed. The person left alone with it. The choice made in private reveals more than any presented version of a person ever could. You watched me, she said. Yes. From across the street. Yes. In the rain. Yes. He did not flinch from it, and he did not over-apologize, which would have felt false. You didn't take it. You closed it, put it back, and went back to work. A pause. I have never seen anyone do that as quickly or as quietly. Most people deliberate. Most people touch the money more than once. She looked away. At the oak tree, at the light through its leaves. It wasn't a virtue, she said. It was what my mother raised me to be. I know, he said. That's what made it real. The air between them had changed. Something was moving in it, or through it. Through her, a warmth that was no longer small or contained or resident in only one place. It moved through her chest, her arms, the back of her throat, and it wasn't uncomfortable. That was the part she didn't know how to hold, that it didn't frighten her exactly. It clarified her, like adjusting the focus on something that had always been blurred at the edges. My mother, she said. She suppressed something in me, didn't she? It wasn't quite a question. Selim was quiet for a moment. We believe so, he said. Then we landed without explanation, and she filed it away. The bond reaching you the way it has, delayed, building slowly rather than arriving all at once the way it should. That pattern is consistent with the suppression. Something placed over your wolf nature when you were very young, likely by someone who loved you and was afraid. Wolf nature. She heard the words and waited for the rejection in herself. The flat, practical refusal that should have risen immediately from the woman she knew herself to be. A woman of concrete things, of rent and coffee and $4 tips. It didn't come. Instead, her mother's face rose in her mind. Young in the photograph. Something in her eyes that Noelle had always read as wistfulness and now, with the cold clarity of this particular afternoon, reread as something else entirely. Vigilance. Her mother had been watching for something her whole life. The man who came to the diner, Selim said. His voice had shifted, quieter, but with an edge moving beneath it, something careful and controlled that she recognized now, instinctively as restraint. Darian, what was he to you? Someone I trusted, she said. For years ago, before my mother died. She paused. He disappeared around the time she got sick. I assumed grief scared him off. Another pause. I was wrong, apparently. Selim's jaw tightened, barely perceptibly. He's a low-rank wolf from a minor pack with a history of running information between packs for money. His eyes came to hers. He knew where you were, Noelle. He's known for some time. He chose now to show himself. The sentence reorganized something in her understanding. Quietly, completely. He didn't come because he heard I was still in the city, she said. No, he came because of you. Because of you, Selim said. Because whatever is waking up in you is becoming visible to people who can sense it. And some of them have reasons to want it to stay suppressed. He paused, or to stop altogether. The park continued around them. The child, the pigeons, the city's distant hum. The ordinary world, indifferent and continuous. Noelle sat with the architecture of what she'd just been told and felt it settle into her, stone by stone, reshaping the foundation of things she had taken as permanent. She was not who she thought she was. Her mother had known. I was afraid. Had hidden something inside her daughter with love and fear in equal measure, and had spent a lifetime watching for the moment it might try to surface. Don't let them suppress it forever. She pressed her fingers to her sternum. The warmth there was full and present now, no longer the faint pilot light of those first confusing weeks. It moved through her in slow, continuous waves, and she understood, not with her mind, but with the bone-deep certainty of something finally aligning, that this was not a thing happening to her. This was something waking up inside her, something that had always been there, something her mother had locked away with trembling, loving hands and prayed would stay quiet, until the right moment, until the right person. She looked at Selim. He was watching her with an expression she had no previous name for. It was not pity, not urgency, not the performance of patience. It was the expression of a man witnessing something he had waited a very long time to see, and was not yet sure he would be allowed to be part of. There's more, she said. Isn't there? Yes. Tell me. He held her gaze. The light through the oak leaves moved across the angles of his face, and something shifted in him. That contained current carrying tension she had noticed in the diner resolving into something she could finally read. Not complicated. Not strategy. Fear. Real, quiet, human fear of losing this. Of saying the next thing and watching her stand up and walk away from the bench and take the warmth in his chest, and the bond that had been forming in the space of their shared mornings, and the months of waiting before he ever placed a wallet in her section with her. He was afraid of losing her. And that more than anything he had said, more than the bond, or the bloodline, or the ancient machinery of a world she was only beginning to understand. That was the thing that made her stay. She shifted, slightly on the bench, half an inch closer, enough that their arms were nearly touching, enough to say without words that she was still here, that the ground had moved, and she was still on it. Tell me, she said again, gently this time. He exhaled, slow and quiet like something released. My counsel, he began, the people who advise me and govern with me. There are those among them who have known about you for longer than I have. His voice was steady, but something moved beneath it. And one of them, I don't yet know who, was involved in what was done to your mother. The air left the park, or it felt that way. The sounds continued, the city continued, the child somewhere behind the oak continued, but Noelle heard none of it. She heard only the implication, clear and cold and devastating, settling into the space between his words. Someone on his council, someone close to him, trusted by him, seated at the table of his authority, had known her mother, had been there at the beginning of the suppression, the hiding, the fear-drenched love that had shaped every careful thing her mother had ever said to her across every kitchen table of her entire childhood, had been there, and was still there now. The warmth in her chest did not retreat. It changed, sharpened at its edges, the way it had on the sidewalk with Darian, but larger this time, more certain. She felt it move through her like a tide, changing direction. Do not fear driving it. Something older, something that knew, without being told, that this was not the end of a revelation, but the beginning of a war. Chapter 5. She didn't go home that night. Not directly. She walked instead, the long, purposeless kind of walking that isn't going anywhere and knows it, the kind the body does when the mind has received more than it can process in a seated position. She walked through the park, out the east gate, down Callaway and onto Brennan, past the laundromat and the late pharmacy and the corner store with the handwritten sale signs, through all the ordinary geography of a life she had built carefully and quietly over years. And she felt it all differently now. Not wrong. That was the word she kept expecting, the sense that something was wrong with everything she had known. But it wasn't wrong. It was angled, as though the same room she had always lived in had been lit, for the first time, from a new direction, and the shadows fell in completely different places, and the familiar furniture cast unfamiliar shapes. And she was still herself, standing in the middle of it. That was the part that surprised her most. She had expected the revelation to unmake her somehow, to stand in the wreckage of her own identity and sort through the rubble for something salvageable. That was the story she had told herself, walking away from the park bench, that the cost of knowing would be the person she'd been before knowing. But she was still no Alvaria. She still ached in her right knee when it rained. She still thought in the specific, structured way her mother had taught her. She still loved the particular quality of silence in the diner before the morning rush, and the warmth of the first coffee, and the way Sable laughed when something genuinely caught her off guard. She was still all of that. She was simply also something more. You are more than you know, my love. She stopped on the corner of Brennan and Ninth and pressed her fingers against her sternum, and felt the bond, full and steady and continuous now, like a second heartbeat that had always been there and had simply been too quiet to hear. She stood there in the amber wash of the street lamp and she breathed. And she made a decision. Not about Selim. Not yet. That was too large and too layered, and deserved more than a street corner in the dark. But about herself. About the thing her mother had hidden inside her with loving, frightened hands and the best of intentions. She was not going to suppress it anymore. Whatever it was, whatever it meant, whatever world it opened into and whatever it asked of her, she was done being sealed away from her own nature by someone else's fear, even a fear born from love. She was done. She walked home and slept, deeply and without dreaming, for the first time in weeks. Selim arrived at 9 the next morning. She was ready for him. Not in the way of performance or preparation. She had not arranged anything. But in the way of a woman who had done her deciding in the dark and arrived in the morning with a clearer mind than she'd had in months. She let the rush thin. She let the last table clear. She poured 2 cups of the good coffee, not the staff brew, the real kind, and she set them both at booth 12 and sat down across from him. He looked at the second cup, then at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not surprise, but something adjacent. The careful, voltage-heavy control he carried loosening, fractionally, at the edges. The council member, she said. The one involved with my mother. How long have you suspected? He wrapped both hands around his cup. 3 weeks, he said. Approximately since the second time I came here. I found a record in our archives, old correspondence between 2 council members from 27 years ago. Your mother's name was in it. What was done to her? His jaw tightened. What was done to you? And you didn't tell me. No, because he met her eyes directly. Because I didn't know how much you could handle yet. How much of this world you were ready to receive. A pause. I was wrong about that. She noted the admission. He made it the way he made everything. Plainly, without softening it into something easier to digest. She found that she respected it. It didn't erase the frustration of being managed, however gently, but it sat differently than a justification would have. What did the record say, she asked. About my mother. He was quiet for a moment. She could see him choosing, not whether to tell her, but how. Finding the right entry point into something that had many edges. Your mother was not born in this city, he said. She was born in the Northern Territories, a mid-rank pack, not prominent, but with an unusually strong bloodline going back several generations. Her name, before she changed it, was not Varia. He paused. She was the daughter of a line that produced, in its strongest iterations, female alphas. The diner's morning quiet held itself around them. Female alphas are rare, he continued. In most generations, they don't appear at all. When they do, he paused, as though considering the weight of what came next. They are not always welcomed by those in existing positions of power. A female alpha challenges the structure of pack authority in ways that some find threatening. Your mother was identified as carrying the gene before you were born. The record suggests she was given a choice: submit to pack governance or leave. His voice was low and even, but she heard the current beneath it. She left. She hid. And before she went, someone with access to suppression ritual, visited her. Make sure that whatever she carries, whatever you might inherit, would stay quiet. Noelle sat very still. Her mother is 20-something in the photograph, with those watchful, wistful, vigilant eyes. Her mother moves them every 2 years. Her mother deflected questions about family with the gentleness of practiced silence. Her mother loved her with a fierceness that gripped too hard, that sat too close to fear. All of it reordering itself, all of it acquiring new coordinates. She was protecting me, Noelle said, in the only way she understood how. Selim's voice had softened. She suppressed your nature because she believed a visible female alpha without pack protection was a target. She wasn't wrong about the danger. She was wrong to think hiding was the only answer. Noelle looked at her coffee. Who did the ritual? Who suppressed me? The record names a council member, he said. A man who was already on my father's council at the time, and who currently sits on mine. A pause. Hadrian. The name meant nothing to her. But the way he said it, with the careful, contained precision of a man holding his anger on a very tight leash, told her everything she needed to know about what it meant to him. He's been in your council this entire time, she said. Yes. And he knew about me. Yes. Which is why Darian showing up when he did was not a coincidence. His eyes met hers. Hadrian sent him. Not to threaten you, not yet. To assess. To see how far along you were. How much of your nature had returned. His jaw tightened. And to report back. She thought about Darian on the sidewalk. Something's different about you. The way he'd stopped. The way his easy surface had cracked and something calculating had shown through. He'd been measuring her. What does Hadrian want? She asked. The same thing he's always wanted, Selim said. Control over who holds power and how. A female alpha bonded to me would shift the balance of authority in ways he has spent decades preventing. His eyes were steady on hers. You're not just my mate, Noelle. You are, in your own right, a power he has been trying to suppress since before you were born. The sentence landed and expanded the way large, true things do, slowly with increasing weight, until the full shape of it was visible. She was not a complication in someone else's story. She was the story. She had always been the story. Her mother had known it and tried, with love and fear and the best of her limited options, to keep her small enough to survive it. Noelle pressed her palms flat on the table. The formica was cool and solid beneath her hands. She pressed into it deliberately, grounding herself. What happens now? She asked. Now I remove Hadrian from the council. Formally, publicly, with the full evidence the archive record provides. His voice was steady. But that process takes time. And in the window between accusation and removal, he will move. Move how? That's what I don't yet know. He looked at her with an expression she had learned to read over weeks of careful, incremental attention. The expression that wasn't distance, but something it cost him to maintain. What I do know is that you are not safe alone. Not while Darian is reporting back, and Hadrian is calculating his next step. Noelle looked at him. She thought about what it meant to trust someone. Not the easy kind of trust that came from sufficient time and sufficient evidence and nothing yet gone wrong. The harder kind, the kind you extend before the proof is complete, because waiting for certainty is itself a choice with consequences. You were going to tell me eventually, she said. About all of this. Yes. When? When I was sure you were ready. And now. He held her gaze. Now I think I was wrong to make that determination for you. You were, she said. Simply. Without heat. Don't do it again. Something moved through his expression, something she recognized from the park bench, as relief mixed with the specific weight of a man recalibrating. I won't, he said, and he meant it in the same plain way he meant everything. She picked up her coffee. She drank it. She sat it down and looked at the table for a moment, at the grain of the formica, at the ordinary and the extraordinary coexisting in the space of one diner booth on a Friday morning. I need to tell Sable, she said. I know, and I need 2 days. She looked at him. Not to decide, I've decided. I need 2 days to let my life in this shape settle before I start moving through the next one. He looked at her for a long moment. She saw the tension in him, the pull of urgency against the respect he owed her, the instinct to protect competing with the understanding that protection offered without permission was just another kind of control. He chose correctly. 2 days, he said. Then we talk about what comes next. Together. She held his gaze. Not you deciding for me. Together. Together, he agreed. She stood. She picked up his empty cup in her own. She was a waitress in a diner on the corner of Westfall and Ninth. She was the daughter of a woman who had loved her fiercely and imperfectly. She was a person of quiet honesty and overdue rent and a right knee that predicted rain. And she was the thing her mother had tried to keep safe by keeping it hidden. She was all of it, simultaneously and without contradiction. She carried the cups back to the counter. And that was when her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go. Something made her answer. That sharpness again. The edge of instinct she was learning not to dismiss. Hello. Silence on the line. Then breathing. Then a voice, low and unhurried, that she had never heard before and recognized immediately as dangerous in the particular way of a man who has never needed to perform power, because he has simply always had it. Miss Varia, the voice said, I think it's time we spoke without the Alpha King present. Alpha King. The words rearranged the room. She stood at the counter of her diner with the coffee cups in her hand and the morning around her and the bond in her chest, and she understood, in the space of one cold, clarifying second, every dimension of what she had just walked into. Alpha King. Not Alpha. King. She turned slowly and looked across the diner to booth 12, where Selim sat with his hands around his coffee cup and his eyes already on her, already moving, already reading her face across the distance with the precision of a man who recognized what was happening from the change in her expression alone. He was on his feet before she lowered the phone. But the voice on the line spoke again before she could say a word. Come alone, Hadrian said, or I'll make sure the people you care about in this diner understand exactly what's been sleeping under their roof. The line went dead, and the warmth in Noelle's chest, that full, steady, continuous second heartbeat, didn't waver. It blazed. She set the phone on the counter. She set the cups down beside it. She placed both palms flat on the surface and breathed in, slowly, through the rising fire in her chest, through the sharpness of a nature that had been caged for 26 years and was done, completely, permanently done, being told to stay quiet. Selim reached her in 4 strides. What happened? His voice was low. Not a command, a question, but urgent in the way of a man whose every instinct had just tripped simultaneously. She looked at him. Alpha King. She turned the knowledge over. Hold it against every morning, every cup of coffee, every careful, unhurried conversation across booth 12. Felt the anger, real and legitimate, and also, beneath it, the honesty she owed herself. Had he lied to her? No. He had not told her everything. But he had not lied. Had he treated her as though her choices mattered? In the ways that counted, yes. Did it change what she now knew about herself, about her mother, about what was waking up inside her? Not by a single degree. She was not a woman who made decisions in the middle of the emotional weather. She made them after, when the air cleared enough to see by. Hadrian called me, she said. His jaw went tight. He wants me to come alone. She held his gaze. I'm not going to do that. No, he said. The word came out with a flatness that left no room for the alternative. You are not. But I'm not going to hide either. She straightened, stood at her full height, which had felt ordinary yesterday and felt different today. Not larger, but truer somehow, more fully occupied. You told me I was a power he's been suppressing since before I was born. Yes. Then it's time he understood that it didn't work. She looked at him steadily. We do this together. You said you'd find the evidence. You'd remove him formally and publicly. That's what we do. No more windows. No more waiting for the right moment. She paused. The right moment is now because he's moved first and we don't let that stand. He looked at her for a long time. She watched him find her, really find her, in the way he had been finding her since the first morning, across the distance of the diner, and she watched something settle in him. Something that had been held taut for a very long time. The archive record is already secured, he said. My beta has had it for a week, waiting for my instruction to move. Then instruct him. He held her gaze, and she saw it again, that thing she'd seen on the park bench. The fear of losing this, the gratitude of being met. The expression of a man who had spent his entire life making decisions alone and was being offered, for the first time, the weight of another person choosing to stand beside him rather than behind him. He reached for his phone. Sable appeared at Noelle's elbow. She had been at the other end of the counter. She had heard enough. She did not ask whether Noelle was all right because she knew, from the quality of Noelle's stillness, from the straight line of her spine, from the way the light in her eyes had changed and was not changing back, that all right was beside the point. What do you need? Sable asked. Noelle looked at her. Her oldest friend. Her steadiest constant. The woman who had arrived at her apartment with good coffee and her grandmother's truth at 7 in the morning without being asked twice. Stay here, Noelle said. Run in the morning. Don't open the door for anyone you don't recognize. Sable nodded once. Go, she said. Noelle untied her apron. She folded it on the counter with the clean, deliberate care of someone who intends to come back. She smoothed the front of it. She set it squarely on the edge of the counter where she always left it at the end of a shift. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Selim fell into step beside her. Not in front. Not behind. Beside, with the specific, intentional geometry of a man who understood, perhaps better than most, the difference between protecting someone and walking with them. The bell above the door rang as they stepped out into the morning. And Noelle Varia, waitress, daughter, woman of concrete things and overdue rent and a right knee that ached in the rain, stepped through it and into the full, blazing, uncontained shape of everything she had always been. For the first time without apology. For the first time without a cage. For the first time. Free. Chapter 6. The address Hadrian had sent, appearing as a follow-up text from the same unknown number, precise and unhurried, as though he expected compliance as a matter of course, was a building on the north edge of the city. Not a dramatic location. That was the first thing Noelle noticed as the car moved through the morning traffic with Selim at the wheel and 2 of his men, following at a discreet distance behind them. No remote forest, no castle on a hill. Just a building, tall, glass-fronted. The kind of anonymous corporate architecture that exists in every city and registers in no one's memory. The kind of place that disappears into its surroundings by design. The kind of place that had something to hide. He'll have people inside, Selim said. His voice was controlled, but she had learned its registers well enough now to hear what lived beneath the control. A tightly managed fury. Not at her. At the situation, at the years of it, at a man who had sat at his table and looked him in the eye across countless decisions and carried this the entire time. How many, she asked. Enough to make a point. Not enough to start something he can't explain. A pause. Hadrian is many things. Reckless is not among them. He wants this contained. He wants it quiet. He called me from an unknown number and threatened Sable, she said. That's not particularly quiet. That's fear, Selim said. He felt you waking up. He's been feeling it for weeks, through whatever thread of the suppression ritual still connects him to what he did to your mother. When a suppression breaks, the caster feels it. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel, then deliberately relaxed. He's been watching you come back to yourself, and he knows he's running out of time. Noelle looked at the city moving past the window. Buildings, people, the ordinary continuous life of a place that had no idea what moved beneath its surface. She thought about her mother running, moving every 2 years, watching every door, loving her daughter with a love that left marks because it was terrified of leaving her unguarded for a single moment. Spending 26 years maintaining a prison for her own child, constructed from fear, and the kind of love that can't always tell the difference between protection and suppression. She felt no anger at her mother. She had expected to, had braced for it in the dark of her apartment as another dimension of the night's unwinding. But it hadn't come. What came instead was something quieter and more devastating. A grief so complete it had no sharp edges. A sorrow for a woman who had been given an impossible choice and had made the only one she could see. She had kept her daughter alive. She had kept her daughter free in the limited, human-shaped way she could manage. She had done it imperfectly, at enormous cost to them both. And at the end, barely able to breathe, she had said the most important thing. Don't let them suppress it forever. She had trusted, even then, that her daughter would find her way to the truth, that the truth would hold. She had been right. When we go in, Noelle said, I speak first. Selim glanced at her. Noelle, I speak first. She said it without heat, without the need for emphasis. Simply, the way she said most things she had already decided. This started with my mother. It has my name on it. I am not walking into that room to stand behind you while you resolve something that has been living in my body since I was a child. A silence. She watched him work through it, watched the instinct to protect compete with the understanding she had asked him directly to honor. You speak first, he said. Thank you. But if it moves wrong, I will tell you. She looked at him. I'm not asking to do this alone. I'm asking to do this with you. There's a difference. He held her gaze at a red light for 3 full seconds. Then he looked back at the road. Together, he said. Together. The lobby was empty when they entered. That in itself was information. A building this size, at this hour, should have had a front desk. Foot traffic, the ambient movement of an ordinary working morning. The emptiness was arranged. A message delivered in negative space. I control this environment. Adjust accordingly. Noelle didn't adjust. She walked through the lobby with her feet flat and her spine straight and the bond blazing in her chest like something that had been compressed for a very long time and had found, at last, the room it needed. The elevator opened without them pressing a button. Another message. They rode up in silence. Selim stood beside her, not in front, not with a hand at her back, not positioning himself between her and the door. Beside, she was aware of every inch of the distance between them and grateful for the respect embedded in it. The doors opened to a wide, high-ceilinged room. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the far wall. The city laid out beneath them like a claim. A long table to the left, empty. And at the windows, his back to them, a man. He was older than she had imagined from his voice. Gray at the temples, a well-tailored suit. A stillness that mimicked Selim's, but was thinner at its core. Not the stillness of a man at peace with himself, but the stillness of a man who has practiced composure long enough to wear it as a costume. He didn't turn immediately. He let them cross the room. He let the silence establish itself on his terms. She stopped 12 feet from him. Turn around, she said. He turned. His eyes moved to Selim first. Instinct, or hierarchy, or the reflex of a man for whom women had always been secondary data. Then they moved to her. She watched him find her, watching his eyes travel her face, her posture, the quality of light she apparently now carried visibly, because she saw the exact moment he registered it, a slight tightening around his eyes, a micro-adjustment in his stillness. Something recalculated. Miss Veria, he said. His voice was the same as on the phone. Smooth, unhurried, calibrated. You look remarkably like your mother. I've been told that, she said. She was a remarkable woman. Stubborn, short-sighted. A pause waited with implication. She could have had protection, you know. Structure. A life within the pack rather than the fugitive existence she chose. She refused. She refused a cage, Noelle said. Most people with dignity do. Something moved in his expression. Not anger. She didn't think he experienced anger the way ordinary people did. Something more like the recalibration of a man who expected deference and was receiving something else. You've been busy, he said, eyes moving briefly to Selim, filling her head with history. framing my actions as something predatory. Were they not? Selim said. His voice was very quiet. They were necessary. Hadrian's eyes returned to Noelle. A female alpha bonded to an alpha king creates an imbalance of power that destabilizes an entire system. A system that took generations to build. I did what was required to protect it. You suppressed a child, Noelle said. You drove her mother into hiding. You sent a man to watch me on the sidewalk. She looked at him steadily. Those are not the actions of someone protecting a system. Those are the actions of someone protecting his position within it. Silence. The city spread behind him through the glass, indifferent and vast. You have no standing in the pack structure, Hadrian said. Whatever is walking in you, you have no title, no rank, no formal recognition. You are a waitress in a diner. He paused, and she heard the blade under the words, the thing he expected to wound. That is all you are. She let the words land. She let them sit for a full moment, the way you let a thing sit before you pick it up and examine it honestly. Then she said quietly, my mother worked 2 jobs for 17 years to keep us housed and fed and moving when we needed to move. She gave everything she had to keep me safe in the only way she knew how. She was the bravest person I have ever known. A pause. If you mean to diminish me by comparing me to her, you have made a serious miscalculation. The quality of the room changed. She felt it, not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech, but physically, in the air and in her sternum, and in the ancient, awakened thing that had been living in her bones her entire life, and was now, for the first time, fully present. It radiated outward from her in a wave she couldn't see but felt the edges of, and she understood, with a bone-deep certainty that needed no instruction, that Hadrian felt it too. He took a half-step back. He didn't mean to. She could see that in the sudden tightness of his expression, the awareness that his body had responded before his mind had authorized it. The specific humiliation of a man who has controlled every room he has ever entered, suddenly understanding that this one has changed ownership. The archive record, Selim said, stepping forward to stand beside Noelle. Documenting your communication with the suppression ritual caster, your correspondence with the council member who first identified Noelle's mother, and your instruction to Darian to surveil a woman under alpha protection. He paused. My beta transmitted it to the full council 40 minutes ago. Every member has it. It is also with the 3 pack elders who hold independent oversight authority. Hadrian went very still. You will be called before the council, Selim continued. Formally, with full right of response and representation. Every procedural protection you are owed will be extended because, unlike you, I do not suppress inconvenient things. I face them. He let that settle. Resign before they call you, Noelle said. It won't undo what you did, but it might tell you something about whether any part of you understands the weight of it. Hadrian looked at her for a long moment. The composure was intact, but structural now, holding up by habit rather than conviction, the way a building holds after the foundation has begun to give. You don't know what you are, he said, and the cruelty was gone from his voice. What remained was something she hadn't expected, something almost bleak. What it costs, what it demands. No, she agreed. Not yet. She held his gaze without flinching. But I intend to find out. On my own terms, with no one else's hand on the lock. She turned. She walked back toward the elevator. She heard Selim follow. That particular weight of his step, the specific cadence she had been cataloging since the first morning he walked into her diner. She heard it now with a clarity that startled her and understood it was the bond hearing him, not just her ears. The bond that recognized him before she could see him. The bond that had been doing so since the very first day. The elevator opened. They stepped inside. The doors closed. And in the descending silence, somewhere between the 8th floor and the lobby, Noelle's legs decided they had carried the morning's weight long enough and leaned, just slightly, just honestly, against the wall. Selim turned. He looked at her with the expression she had no previous name for and now did. It was how you look at someone you were afraid of losing and haven't lost. It was relief and fury and the specific gratitude of a man who has been let in by someone who keeps their doors locked for good reasons. You were magnificent, he said, quietly, without performance. I was terrified, she said, equally quietly. I know. He looked at her. So was I. She studied his face. The angles of it, the steadiness, the exhaustion she could see now that the morning's tension had cracked open enough to let it through. This man who had placed a wallet in her section and returned every morning and told her the truth in pieces, paced to what she could absorb, and was wrong about the pacing, and admitted it without armor. This man who was, apparently, a king. You should have told me, she said. What you were. I know. From the beginning. Yes. He held her gaze. I was afraid it would change how you saw me. Before you had decided who I was independent of the title. She considered that. She held it against every morning and every cup of coffee and every conversation across booth 12. It does change how I see you, she said honestly. Some things will need renegotiating. I know. I am not a subject, she said. I am not something to be managed or paced or protected from information I have the right to. No, he said. You are not. If this, she paused, found the right word. If this is real, if we do this, it's a partnership. Actual, structural partnership. Not consultation. Not being informed after the decisions are made. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him absorb the terms, not negotiate against them, not reframe them into something easier. Absorb them. The way you absorb something you recognize as right even when it requires adjustment. Yes, he said. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Neither of them moved for a moment. The bond, she said. What does it feel like? On your side. He looked at her with something she recognized from the park bench, that stripped, unguarded quality that appeared only at the edges of the control he normally kept so seamlessly in place. Like finding something I didn't know I had lost, he said, and being terrified every morning that you would decide it wasn't worth the complication. She held that. She thought about her mother's watchful eyes in the photograph. She thought about the kitchen tables and the 2 jobs and the careful, constant love that had never been able to rest. She thought about a woman who had run because no one had offered her a third option, who had chosen exile over submission and spent her whole life in the narrow corridor between. She thought about what it would mean to refuse the corridor entirely, to walk out into the open. She stepped out of the elevator, into the lobby, into the light, into the full unreduced shape of a morning that had begun in a diner and arrived here, at the threshold of a life that looked nothing like the one she had been carefully, quietly, sensibly constructing for years. She stopped in the middle of the lobby. She turned around. Phelim stood in the elevator doorway, watching her with the expression of a man who has learned, at very high cost, not to reach for something before it's offered. She looked at him. French toast, she said. Left side of the menu. He blinked. The corner of his mouth moved. What? You've been ordering it every Tuesday and Thursday for a month. You always eat about 2/3 of it and then stop. She tilted her head slightly. You like the first piece. The rest is a habit. He stared at her. I pay attention, she said, to things that matter to me. A pause. You matter to me. That's not a declaration. It's data, and I'm giving it to you plainly because that's what I expect in return. He stepped out of the elevator. He crossed the lobby in slow, deliberate steps, the unhurried movement of a man who has stopped being afraid of the destination, and he stopped in front of her. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, that specific warmth that the bond knew before anything else did. Noelle Veria, he said. Low. Her name in his voice had always been different from her name anywhere else, and she was done pretending she hadn't noticed. Phelim, she said. I want to court you properly. The word was old-fashioned, and he used it without embarrassment, with the directness of a man who means the weight behind words and chooses them accordingly. With your knowledge of what I am and what that means. With your terms on the table. With no more managing and no more pacing and no more decisions made for your benefit without your consent. She looked at him for a moment. You already have been, she said. For a month. You just did it without my informed agreement. She paused. So we start over from here. From this morning. With everything visible. From here, he agreed. She extended her hand. He looked at it. Then at her. Then, with a gravity that was not theatrical, but entirely genuine, the gravity of a man who understands what is being offered and accepts it with his whole self, he took it. His hand around hers was warm, solid. The bond surged through the contact and settled, immediately and completely, into the most sustained quiet she had felt in weeks. As though it had been waiting for this exact configuration of things, and could finally, at last, breathe. She felt her wolf, still new to her, still finding its shape, but undeniably present, undeniably hers, settle in her chest with the particular satisfaction of something that has been patient for a very long time. There, it seemed to say. Finally, they went back to the diner. Of course they did. There was nowhere else that felt like the right place for the next part of the morning, and neither of them said so out loud. But when Selim turned the car south instead of asking where she wanted to go, she didn't correct him. Sable was behind the counter when they walked in. She looked at Noelle the way she always looked at her when something had happened, the full, searching attention of a woman who knew her face like a map and could read its new terrain instantly. What she read made her exhale. Okay, she said, quietly, firmly, with the tone of someone confirming something they had believed was possible but hadn't dared name until now. Okay. Noelle walked behind the counter. She picked up her apron. She tied it on. Sable watched her. We're in the middle of the lunch prep. I know. Noelle pulled the order pad from its spot. That's why I'm here. Sable looked at Selim, who had taken his usual seat at booth 12 with the quiet ease of a man, for whom that seat had become the most familiar place in this city. Then she looked back at Noelle. Is he staying? She asked. For now, Noelle said. She glanced across the diner. He was looking at her. He was, she now understood, almost always looking at her, not with the weight of surveillance, but with the specific, continuous attention of someone for whom the sight of her was, in the most uncomplicated and fundamental sense, where their eyes wanted to be. She looked back at her order pad. He takes the French toast on Tuesdays and Thursdays, she told Sable. But today's a special occasion. Ask him if he wants to see the left side of the menu properly. Sable blinked. Then, slowly, she smiled. The real one, the unguarded kind that transformed her face entirely. Special occasion, she repeated. The first day of something new, Noelle said. That counts. She called her mother that evening. Not a call she could make. Her mother was 4 years gone, and the grief of that was permanent and had no resolution. But she sat at her kitchen table with the photograph in front of her, and she spoke out loud into the quiet of her apartment the way she had sometimes done in the worst of the first year, when the silence felt too much like absence. I'm okay, she said. More than okay, actually. A pause. I found it. The thing you asked me not to let stay suppressed. Another pause. It found me, if I'm being accurate. She looked at her mother's young face in the photograph. The watchful eyes. The set of her jaw that Noelle had inherited without knowing it. You would have liked him, she said. He's infuriating in a very specific way. Very certain. Very patient. He thinks he knows best and has to be reminded that he doesn't. She paused. You would have told him so directly in that voice you used, and he would have listened. She felt the smile before she knew she was making it. He does listen. That's the thing. He actually listens. The apartment was quiet around her. The water heater, still a liar, still unreliable, knocked twice against the pipes and settled. I'm not afraid, she said, and meant it and felt it and let it stand in the air of her kitchen as the most complete truth she had spoken in years. I know I should be, probably. There's still things to face. The council, the pack, all of it. I don't know how most of that works yet. A pause. But I'll learn. On my terms. She looked at the photograph for a long moment. Thank you, she said finally, for keeping me alive long enough to get here, for trusting that I would find my way. She pressed her fingers briefly to the photograph, to her mother's face. I understand now why you were afraid. I don't agree with every choice you made, but I understand. And I love you. That doesn't change. She sat there for a few more minutes in the good quiet of a woman who had said the thing that needed saying. Then she got up, washed her face, and went to bed. She slept deeply. She dreamed of open ground, wide sky, the specific exhilarating terror of running at full speed with something powerful and new moving beneath her skin, and finding, in the dream, that the terror was only the first layer. Underneath it was joy. Pure, expansive, uncaged joy. She woke before her alarm, in the thin early light of a morning that had not yet decided what it was going to be, and she lay still for a moment with the bond warm and continuous in her chest, and the dream still vivid behind her eyes. Then she got up. She made coffee, the good kind, the kind from the place on Ardmore, because some mornings deserve the real thing before they even asked for it. She stood at her kitchen window with the cup warm in both hands and watched the city begin its slow daily resurrection. Lights coming on, the first buses, someone's dog pulling its owner down the sidewalk with magnificent, purposeful energy, and she felt the shape of what her life was becoming. Not smaller than what she had built, not a replacement for it, an expansion. A door she had not known was in the wall, open now, with all the familiar things she loved still present in the room behind her and something vast and bright ahead. She pressed one hand to her sternum, felt the bond, steady and warm, pulsing with the quiet regularity of something that had found its place and intended to stay. Somewhere across the city, she knew, with a certainty that had no rational source and needed none, that Selim was awake, that he was, in whatever space he occupied at this hour, aware of her in the same continuous, particular way, that the bond moved through him as it moved through her, like a second heartbeat, like a compass, like a frequency neither of them had chosen and both of them had stopped resisting. She picked up her phone. She sent one message. French toast. Left side of the menu. Don't be late. The reply came in under a minute. I'm never late. She put the phone down. She finished her coffee. She pulled on her jacket. The good one, the warm one, the one that had lasted 3 winters and showed no signs of giving up, and she picked up her keys. She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the handle in the specific, held breath of a threshold moment, the space between what was and what comes next, and she felt everything she was, the exhaustion of years and the strength they had built in her, the grief of her mother and the gift her mother had left inside her, the honest, unromantic weight of a life made of small dignities and the unexpected, blazing magnitude of what she was growing into. She felt all of it simultaneously without needing to resolve the contradiction. She opened the door. She stepped through it, into the morning, into the city, into the full and uncontained and unashamed shape of everything she had always been, and everything she was only just beginning to become. The end.
Thank you for listening to Wolf Bond's stories. If this story moved you, surprised you, or kept you company through the night, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who loves a slow burn done right. Every comment, every share, and every new subscriber helps these stories find the people who need them most. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of something new. Until next time, the bond finds you when you are ready, and sometimes just a little before.